A man was shot dead in public while running for office. His wife decided to take over the cause he had left unfinished, but within 2 days, death threats came one after another. First, there was a premeditated bomb attack. Then came the street hunt by terrorists. She walked constantly on the edge of death, yet still had to deal with betrayal from people around her. But every time she felt desperate, she would always recall the efforts her husband had put into running for president. Jack was a top candidate in South Korea's presidential election. He was very popular among the people, and often took part in public welfare activities. The most important thing was, he had the strong support of his wife Ji-hyun behind him. But on this day, while Jack was giving a speech, a killer suddenly rushed out from backstage and shot Ji-hyun directly. But the next second, Jack woke up with a start. It turned out what had just happened was just a nightmare. He looked around, but found his wife wasn't by his side. At this point, Ji-hyun was out for a morning run. This was a good habit she had developed over the years. Current news was playing in her earphones. The situation on the Korean peninsula was very tense. The US might intervene strongly to end the conflict. Just then, Ji-hyun noticed someone had been following her, so she quickened her pace, suddenly darted into the nearby woods, and then climbed up a small slope. Only then did she shake off the pursuer. After going back home, Ji-hyun complained to her husband, asking him not to send people to follow her anymore. She didn't need protection, but Jack persuaded his wife to obey. Ji-hyun had come back to South Korea to help him run for president. Jack didn't want anything to happen to Ji-hyun. It turned out those pursuers were bodyguards, sent by Jack to protect Ji-hyun. And Ji-hyun was originally a UN ambassador. In her nearly 4 years of work before, she showed excellent diplomatic skills, and resolved many international disputes. But when she heard that her husband was running for president, she chose to resign and go back to South Korea to fully assist Jack in his presidential campaign. Ji-hyun told her husband that having someone follow her made it impossible for her to run. But Jack firmly refused again. As a presidential candidate, someone was bound to target his family. Ji-hyun had no choice but to accept it. An hour later, South Korea's current president, Choi Shin, attended a banquet under heavy protection. Ji-hyun also attended the banquet. Several senior officials beside her were chatting. One of them sarcastically said, after some foreign officials learned that North Korea might start a nuclear war, they were so scared that they quickly packed their luggage to flee. Unlike them, even though they lived right next to North Korea, they still ate and slept as usual. The other officials nearby echoed in agreement. Their laughter was full of sarcasm, but Ji-hyun looked serious. American media talked about the situation in South Korea every day. They also discussed the situation in the Middle East before the Iraq War. So Ji-hyun was worried that South Korea would repeat the same mistake, but the officials didn't take it seriously at all. They believed that the war of the US and the Middle East wasn't yet over, and temporarily had no energy to interfere in matters on the Korean peninsula. It was at this point that Choi Shin walked over slowly. She pulled Ji-hyun aside, and the two chatted about current political affairs while walking. It turned out they had known each other for a long time. Choi Shin had always highly valued Ji-hyun. After hearing that Ji-hyun had stepped down as UN ambassador, Choi Shin wanted to appoint her as South Korea's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Later, she found out Ji-hyun had gone back to South Korea to help her husband run for president. Choi Shin had no choice but to give up the idea. Choi Shin said seriously, the path Jack was taking now carried considerable risks. 80% of young people in South Korea opposed the unification of the Korean peninsula, yet last year, Jack had become a political rising star admired by young people, actually by making remarks opposing unification, but now he supported unification instead. Such inconsistency was too irresponsible, and would also bring trouble. Ji-hyun's face was filled with worry. She told Choi Shin Jack would attend a unification mass at the Peace and Forgiveness Church today, and would announce an important matter after the mass. Ji-hyun also mentioned Jack wanted to meet with Choi Shin today, no matter how late it was. After saying goodbye to Choi Shin, Ji-hyun went back home, dressed up, and prepared to go to the church with her husband. Jack put a cross necklace on Ji-hyun. Noticing her husband looked preoccupied, Ji-hyun asked him, ever since Jack called last month, she had noticed something was wrong with him. Ji-hyun told Jack not to keep things to himself, but Jack didn't answer. He only said they would talk properly that night. Later, the two of them went to the church by car together, but Jack's behavior on the way was unusually strange. He told his men to let the bodyguards wait outside the church later. He didn't want senior officials to think he was afraid of attacks. The next second, Jack suddenly asked his wife if she wanted to eat peaches together that night. Ji-hyun thought her husband was acting weird. He never took the initiative to buy fruit usually. Besides, peaches weren't in season now. They couldn't be bought domestically at all. but Jihyun didn't think too much about it. She only thought her husband had been under too much pressure lately. When the car approached the church, they saw a large crowd of protesting people gathered by the road. These people held up protest signs and shouted in unison to drive out the traitor. Some even called Jack a traitor to the country and demanded that he withdraw from politics immediately. As a UN ambassador, Jihyun had seen many such scenes before. Under the tight protection of the bodyguards, Jack and Jihyun got into the church. Earlier, Jihyun had seen a young soldier sitting by the road. Next to him was a protest sign that read "Unification is hell." At this point, an agent disguised as a journalist was watching Jihyun from the second floor. Jihyun scanned the surroundings cautiously, but she didn't find anything unusual. Soon after, the sound of bells and hymns rang out. The unification mass officially began. Soon it was Jack's turn to go on stage and give a speech. The agent noticed that a soldier in the crowd was acting strangely, and this soldier was exactly the one Jihyun had seen outside the church, just as everyone was praying. The soldier walked straight towards Jack and questioned why he had betrayed them. Jihyun hurried forward to check the situation. When she saw the soldier was about to shoot again, she immediately stretched out her arms to shield her husband. She also recognized the soldier. Jihyun quickly said she would persuade her husband to stop supporting unification, but the soldier had no intention of stopping. In the nick of time, the bodyguards waiting outside the church rushed in and started exchanging gunfire with the soldier. The dying Jack grabbed the cross necklace from Jihyun's neck. Just then, the soldier had already taken down all the bodyguards. He turned back to finish off Jack, but was controlled by the agent who had arrived. Jihyun hurried to look back, but Jack was already on his last breath. The next second, the soldier trembled violently all over and died too. It seemed he had taken his own life. The news of Jack's attack quickly made headlines. After his mother Ok-sun and grandmother heard the news, they hurried to the hospital. Ok-sun was the president of South Korea's largest maritime logistics company, but even so, she couldn't change fate. The doctor walked up to Jihyun and solemnly said that Jack had died from excessive blood loss. Jihyun collapsed weakly to the ground. She looked at the peach in her hand, recalled all the past events, and couldn't help but shed tears. After Jack, the leader of the new Republican Party, passed away, South Korea's political arena was in chaos. The new Republican Party even held an all-night meeting to discuss countermeasures, planning to select a new presidential candidate as soon as possible. At this point, Jihyun was having a meal at the Jung family mansion. The atmosphere at the dining table was heavy. Jack's grandmother complained that her husband had died early. Ok-sun's husband had also died early, and now even her grandson Jack was dead. Was the Zhang family cursed? Just then, Ok-sun's younger son John proposed to run for president in place of his brother. Ok-sun suddenly became angry. She thought John's abilities were limited. He was competent enough as a prosecutor, but couldn't take on the heavy responsibility of running for president. She wanted Jihyun to take over from Jack and run for president. Looking at history, widows who ran for president had never lost. Moreover, the family had been working towards the presidential election for 3 generations. They mustn't give up easily. But as soon as these words were spoken, they were immediately firmly opposed by her mother-in-law and son. Just then, the lawyer brought Jack's will. After listening to the lawyer, everyone in the Zhang family was shocked. Jack had left all the Zhang family's property to Jihyun. The family members all expressed their opposition, but the will had already taken legal effect and couldn't be changed. In fact, Jihyun was also confused. Jack had never mentioned the will to her before. Facing the taunts from her grandmother-in-law, Jihyun retorted that since she married into the Zhang family, she had always been looked down upon. Jack saw this but was powerless to change it. Perhaps that was why he deliberately left all the family property to her. But no matter what, Ok-sun could never accept this outcome. The wealth accumulated by the Zhang family over 3 generations couldn't all be given to an outsider. She told the lawyer to gather the best team of lawyers to sue Jihyun. Jihyun claimed she would donate all the money and then leave South Korea.
그 미팅도 제 집에서 하실 건가요?
John quickly caught up with Jihyun and persuaded her that instead of donating all the money, she should support him in running for president. But Jihyun saw through John. She turned around and left. At the same time, Agent Baek-san was repairing Jihyun's cross necklace. Suddenly, an international call came in. The middleman Mark said, a South Korean client specifically asked Baek-san to be Jihyun's bodyguard. The client was generous with money but had a special request. Jihyun must be made to think that hiring Baek-san was her own idea, and no information about the client could be disclosed. Baek-san didn't agree immediately. Jihyun and her best friend went to the police station. The police chief told them that The soldier was affiliated with the Special Warfare Command. He was a bit extreme. His residence was filled with photos and information about Jack. It was presumed that he had long been dissatisfied with Jack's actions. His father was deaf and unable to communicate. His sister moved away after getting married. It seemed that the clues had completely dried up. A few days later, Baek San called Mark and refused the job of protecting Ji-hyun. During these days, he had been secretly following Ji-hyun. He found that she was very strong and didn't need his protection. At night, Ji-hyun went to the church alone to meet the priest. Only then did she learn that Jack had come to the church to pray the day before he passed away. Ji-hyun retorted with a trembling voice, Jack was a devout Catholic. If God truly existed, why would he let Jack be killed in the sacred church? Faced with this sharp question, the priest told a story from the Bible. Job didn't see God's face in the storm. Ji-hyun stood frozen in place. The doubts in her heart grew stronger. After a moment, she explained her purpose to the priest. She had come to the church to find Baek San. At this point, Baek San was silently watching everything. From the second floor of the church, he went to the only road Ji-hyun must take home, and waited. He handed the repaired cross necklace to Ji-hyun, and this scene was fully seen by the people secretly following them. The perceptive Baek San quickly noticed something. He pulled Ji-hyun into a tunnel to hide. But the mysterious pursuers kept chasing them closely. Baek San had to knock them unconscious. Then, using his extensive anti-surveillance experience, he helped Ji-hyun escape the pursuit. Ji-hyun was now besieged on all sides, and had to trust Baek San. When they reached a completely safe place, Ji-hyun asked Baek San if he had heard what the soldier said before he died.
나는 간첩을 죽였다.
Could it be that Jack was a spy? Ji-hyun thought for a moment. She believed this matter was by no means as simple as it seemed on the surface. There must be hidden secrets behind it. Baek San took out the video he had filmed. From the video, it could be seen before the soldier attacked Jack, he had tucked a note into the book in front of him. On the day of the incident, Baek San had gotten this note, which had a string of phone numbers written on it, but when he tried to call it, he found it was an empty number. Baek San didn't leave immediately. Instead, he waited for a while near the phone booth. Within a few minutes, a group of men in black arrived near the phone booth. As expected, judging from this, the owner of this phone number had great power, capable of making a phone number disappear without a trace. After that, Baek San retrieved all the surveillance footage near the church. From the day of the incident, he discovered that the person who had secretly met with the soldier was actually Ji-hyun's brother-in-law, John. Early the next morning, Ji-hyun rushed to the security company. She pressed Jack's former head bodyguard for answers, asking since when her husband had requested additional bodyguards. The captain thought for a long time, and recalled that it was 2 months ago, which was the day before Ji-hyun went back to South Korea. Jack had received a call and then hurried out. The travel route was very safe, yet he asked the captain to add more bodyguards, and kept changing his travel routes.
다람쥐가 쫓아오네.
Ji-hyun suddenly remembered. Her husband had told her that John was bitten by a squirrel when he was a child, and later got the nickname Squirrel. She ran home and dug out the photo album, and sure enough, she saw a squirrel pattern in it, with an arrow pointing to John. Just then, Ji-hyun's best friend and assistant, Eun-soo, called. The soldier's family was moving their belongings. They looked flustered, and seemed to be preparing to flee South Korea. Ji-hyun immediately realized something was wrong. She told Eun-soo to follow them from a distance by car, and that she would rush over right away. Eun-soo followed them all the way to the airport, and saw the soldier's family buy one-way tickets to Melbourne. Just as Eun-soo was feeling confused, 2 mysterious men spotted her. When Ji-hyun hurried to the airport, she could no longer contact Eun-soo. The next second, John suddenly called and admitted that he had kidnapped Eun-soo, but said he just wanted to talk to her. Ji-hyun had no mood for joking. She rushed to John's house immediately, and questioned why he had to kill Jack. But John denied it. As a prosecutor, he had the responsibility to supervise presidential candidates, which was why he had secretly monitored Jack. The situation on the Korean peninsula was so tense now. If South Korea's presidential candidate were a spy, the consequences would be unimaginable. It might even trigger a war. And that Baek San wasn't as simple as he seemed either. He was a top mercenary from the US, and would take any dirty job as long as the pay was enough. But Ji-hyun still didn't believe John, because he had always been good at making up facts. She would definitely find out who the real murderer of Jack was. John told Ji-hyun to get out of South Korea within 24 hours, otherwise, he couldn't guarantee Eun-soo's safety. Helpless, Ji-hyun had no choice but to agree. At the same time, the priest urged Baek San to go to North Korea as soon as possible, to take his grandmother who lived there to China. The priest also gave Baek San a cross.
살아서 다시 만날 수 있겠지?
With the priest's permission, Baek San took a Bible with him. He went to the airport immediately, but while waiting for his flight, he found a card tucked inside the Bible, and this card was exactly the same as the previous one. Baek San immediately left the airport and rushed back. At this point, Ji-hyun went to the church alone. She wanted to ask the priest what to do next. but as soon as she pushed the door open, she saw the priest lying in a pool of blood. The next second, Baek-san suddenly covered Ji-hyun's mouth. He told her to leave first. Someone was searching for something in the church. As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of the door being pushed open rang out suddenly. The person who came was exactly the murderer who killed the priest. Baek-san closed the door behind him and fought with the murderer. He lived up to his reputation as a top mercenary, facing an armed enemy with his bare hands. He wasn't at a disadvantage at all. In the end, he defeated the murderer with his top-tier fighting skills. Baek-san grabbed the murderer by the neck and questioned what he was looking for, but the murderer only said, "A whale in the deep sea." Just then, a hurried knock on the door came from outside. Baek-san was distracted for a moment. The murderer took the chance to escape through the window. The situation was getting more and more complicated. Baek-san took Ji-hyun into a secret passage. From Baek-san, Ji-hyun learned this passage was built during the Japanese colonial period, and very few people knew of its existence. Ji-hyun couldn't help but question Baek-san, whether Baek-san had anything to do with Jack and the priest's deaths. Baek-san retorted, if Ji-hyun suspected him, why did she still follow him? He took out the card from the Bible and said he was also chasing the murderer. Just now, Baek-san had a brief look at the priest's body. He found that the priest had been poisoned to death. The professional method was by no means something an ordinary person could do. Earlier, the priest had mentioned that he would pass on Jack's message at the mass the next day. Maybe that was the reason the priest was killed. Ji-hyun suddenly remembered. Jack had said before his death that he would announce something after the mass. It might be the same thing the priest was going to talk about. Baek-san didn't respond. Instead, he took Ji-hyun to the wine cellar. There was a bottle of red wine with his name printed on it. Baek-san poured out the wine inside. An iron container similar to one for holding letters fell out. Inside were a photo and a note. The coordinates shown in the photo were near Myung Island. The note was a secret letter from the U.S. Secretary of State's assistant to Jack. The content read, "This photo is a satellite image from the Defense Intelligence Agency. The object in the photo should be a 10,000-ton nuclear submarine. This nuclear submarine can carry 128 nuclear warheads and has 16 missile launch ports." The U.S. Secretary of State was shocked when he learned the news. He immediately held a meeting and decided that in 2 months, on the birthday of North Korea's leader, to launch an attack on all of North Korea's military nuclear facilities. This operation can be completed in just 5 minutes. The assistant, who was of Korean descent, was very worried. He asked the analyst, "What's the probability that the situation on the Korean peninsula will escalate completely after the attack is completed?" According to the report, there's a 32% chance that it will lead to a full-scale war in East Asia. After the meeting, the assistant advised the Secretary of State to postpone the plan, because with North Korea's economy and technology, it's impossible to build such a nuclear submarine at all. This piece of intelligence is likely forged, but the Secretary of State rejected his request. Helplessly, the assistant had to secretly pass the intelligence to his friend Jack. After reading the letter, Ji-hyun suddenly understood. The thing Jack planned to announce after the mass was the intelligence that the US was about to attack North Korea, and this must be the real reason he was killed. Baek-san understood why the priest had urged him to go to North Korea to pick up his family, because the priest had also seen this intelligence. He knew that North Korea would soon become a battlefield. After coming out of the secret passage, Ji-hyun decided to tell Chae-shin the top secret intelligence. Baek-san, on the other hand, would go to North Korea to pick up his grandmother. He gave the amulet the priest had given him to Ji-hyun, hoping that it would help Ji-hyun protect herself. To find Chae-shin as soon as possible, Ji-hyun called the Secretary General, and finally waited for the presidential motorcade at the entrance of the presidential palace. She rushed onto the car and handed the note to Chae-shin. After reading the note, Chae-shin's expression became solemn. After burning the note, she spoke slowly. It turned out that after Jack's death, both South Korea and the US had been secretly investigating the truth. Chae-shin had also been doing her best to prevent the outbreak of war, but South Korea had little influence on the international stage. So Chae-shin decided to use the opportunity created by Jack's death to strengthen relations with the US. She told Ji-hyun to go abroad immediately to take refuge. Ji-hyun suddenly realized Chae-shin already knew who had killed Jack, but only planned to cover up the truth, to curry favor with the US. At this point, she felt a sense of betrayal. Ji-hyun got off the car from the other side and walked in the opposite direction of Chae-shin. After going back home, Ji-hyun took the initiative to find Ok-sun and brought up the matter of Ok-sun opposing her marriage to Jack. Back then, Ok-sun picked up a box and sat down in front of Ji-hyun. Then she took out a few old photos from the box. Ji-hyun had moved to the US with her mother when she was a child. After becoming famous for her speech at the United Nations during college, she was covered by many media outlets. and there had always been a South Korean national flag hanging in Jihyun's room. It was from that time that Ok-sun changed her opinion of Jihyun. The Jung family had accumulated efforts for 3 generations, all just to produce a South Korean president, but there had always been something missing in Jack. After seeing Jihyun, Ok-sun realized that what Jack lacked was patriotism, and Jihyun could just make up for that. That was why Ok-sun later agreed to Jack and Jihyun's marriage.
아직도 그렇게 생각하세요? 대통령 선거에는 도련님이 아니라.
Seeing that Ok-sun didn't respond, Jihyun continued. She knew Ok-sun was very unwilling to accept the current situation, even if her mother-in-law didn't like her. Jihyun was still the only chance for Ok-sun to achieve her goal.
제가 남은 계단 올라가 보고 싶습니다, 어머니.
Having said this much, Ok-sun couldn't fail to understand what Jihyun meant. Not to mention that she was a smart person. Ok-sun found Jihyun's old file and told her to look at the dream column. On it was clearly written the word president. The next second, Ok-sun asked her daughter-in-law what she planned to do. Jihyun didn't hide anything. She told Ok-sun to tell John to send Eun-soo home, and to let John withdraw from the presidential election and leave South Korea voluntarily. Ok-sun didn't answer. She just held out her hand. At this point, the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law finally reached a cooperation and moved towards the same goal. At this point, Baek-san had already arrived in Dalian, China. He walked into a small, shabby restaurant and found the human smuggler. After the smuggler got the money, he immediately took Baek-san to the bank of the Yalu River. The ferry crossing was blocked. Some bold people tried to cross the river by force, but the next second they were shot full of holes. Looking at the tragic scene in front of him, Baek-san remembered what the priest had said. He finally made a decision. He took out his phone and called Mark.
I'll take care of her.
The next day, Jihyun visited Elsie, who was good at analyzing the situation on the Korean peninsula. Elsie admitted frankly, 1 month ago, Jack had come to see Elsie with a secret letter, and invited Elsie to join his team, but Elsie had refused. Elsie told Jihyun it was he who had introduced the priest to Jack, but the priest had died a terrible death. Elsie had already lost faith in South Korea as a country, and planned to move to Argentina. Upon hearing this, Jihyun begged Elsie to stay. Everything she knew about the situation on the Korean peninsula had been taught by Elsie. Now that Jihyun wanted to run for president, she needed Elsie's help, but Elsie didn't reply immediately. He only sighed. After going back home, Jihyun dug up dirt on John. 10 years ago, John had drunk and driven, killing 2 people. To avoid legal punishment, he had someone take the blame for him. Jihyun placed the irrefutable evidence on the table and told John to get out of South Korea. John immediately realized this was his mother's idea. Helplessly, he could only agree to go abroad temporarily, but John issued a harsh threat. When he came back, he would make Ok-sun and Jihyun pay. At this point, Ok-sun found Man Ji-ai, the current chairman of the new Republican Party. She had found dirt on Man Ji-ai from her husband's database. Ok-sun threatened Man Ji-ai to make Jihyun the presidential candidate of the new Republican Party, otherwise, he would bear the consequences. Man Ji-ai had no choice but to compromise. Later, Ok-sun also found many friends in politics, and asked them to support Jihyun. Coincidentally, photos of Jihyun protecting Jack were exposed online by an American journalist. For a time, South Korean people's affection for this brave woman increased greatly. They said that if Jihyun carried on Jack's legacy, they would definitely vote for her. Before long, Jihyun's approval rating soared. Eun-soo and the head bodyguard Hyung-jun were both very happy. Hyung-jun told Jihyun he had successfully unlocked Jack's phone. He found that during Jack's lifetime, Jack had logged into an encrypted email website many times. The website was hosted on a Swiss server. Users would receive an exclusive key. Without the key, it was impossible to access the website at all. Jihyun told Hyung-jun to do his best to crack it. Just then, Ok-sun pushed the door open and walked in. She called Jihyun to the rooftop. She told Jihyun that she had made a plan to let Jihyun give a public speech at Gwanghwamun Square. After saying that, Ok-sun handed Jihyun a speech script written by professionals and told her to memorize it all. As long as she followed the script, the presidential campaign would be more than half successful. But Ok-sun received a call from Man Ji-ai on her way home. Man Ji-ai said he had received top-secret intelligence. Some Americans got into the country secretly, and their motives were still unclear. South Korea only had one major event recently, the presidential election. Jihyun might be in danger. At the same time, Baek-san had gone back to South Korea. He saw Jihyun's promotional posters everywhere in the city, and didn't know what had happened for a moment, so he called Jihyun, but no one answered. Baek-san first went to the mercenary company, and signed an agreement to protect Jihyun. Mark reminded Baek-san, the famous mercenary Hong Yu had arrived in Seoul the day before. With his skills, he couldn't possibly be captured by surveillance, but Hong Yu had deliberately let his real face be photographed, which obviously meant he had other intentions. In the early hours of the next day, Chaishin called Jihyun, trying to make Jihyun back down.
한국에선 미국이 용인하지 않는 사람은 대통령이 될 수 없다는 거. 그 사람들은 네가 대통령 되는 거 싫대.
Jihyun hung up the phone right away. Later, Jihyun put on a neat black formal suit, put on the cross necklace her husband had given her, and prepared to give the public speech, while Baek-san had already set up a sniper rifle at the selected position, and was closely watching every movement in the venue. The whole process went very smoothly, and Baek-san didn't notice anything unusual, but the next second, he suddenly received a message from Mark. Among the people who sneaked into South Korea with Hongyu, there was a bomb technician. Baek-san immediately sensed something was wrong. He hurried to call Jihyun's campaign team, but no one answered the phone. Helplessly, Baek-san found Hyungjun and told him to stop Jihyun from getting on the high-speed train at all costs, but it was already too late. Baek-san used Hyungjun's phone to call Jihyun, telling her not to stand up no matter what. There might be a pressure bomb under Jihyun's seat. The live broadcast was still ongoing. Jihyun had to stay calm. She told Eunsu to cut off the broadcast and comfort the people around her. She also told her men to evacuate passengers in the surrounding carriages. At this point, Baek-san, burning with anxiety, stepped on the accelerator to the floor, not stopping even when meeting with red lights, and finally arrived at the station just in time. Baek-san rushed to Jihyun's carriage. He tried his best to stay calm, took out the small knife he carried with him, and carefully cut open Jihyun's seat. Sure enough, he saw a pressure bomb counting down. He followed the fuse and found another time bomb on the back of the seat in front of Jihyun. The surface of this bomb was covered with nails. If it exploded, Jihyun wouldn't even have a whole body left. Worse still, the bomb would explode in 6 minutes, but the bomb disposal team would take another 10 minutes to arrive at the scene to calm Jihyun down. Baek-san sat next to her and told her to keep taking deep breaths. After Jihyun's emotions stabilized, Baek-san carefully swapped seats with her. Baek-san glanced at the time, then carefully looked around. With extraordinary courage and rich experience, Baek-san narrowly escaped disaster, and only suffered minor scratches. Both Eunsu and Hyungjun advised Jihyun to cancel her schedule for the day, but Jihyun believed, since she had chosen this path, danger would always exist. She told Eunsu to proceed as originally planned. While she sorted out her emotions backstage, then, she resolutely stepped onto the podium. In the audience sat not only Ok-sun but also Elsie. It seemed Elsie had already chosen to stand on Jihyun's side. As for Baek-san, who had just narrowly escaped, he had already arrived at the sniper position, and was silently guarding Jihyun's safety. The speech officially began, but Jihyun didn't read the pre-prepared speech script. Instead, she spoke from her heart. She had lost her husband and almost lost her life today. Some people said women couldn't be diplomats, others said women weren't qualified to be presidents, but today, she just wanted to say, she would keep working for peace, and strive tirelessly for happy families.
이제 저는 22대 대한민국 대통령 선거 출마를 선언합니다.
As soon as she finished speaking, thunderous applause erupted from the audience. Even Man Ji-ai, who had always opposed her, stood up and applauded for Jihyun. After the speech, Jihyun went home to rest, but she couldn't fall asleep for a long time, so she went to the church to find Baek-san. Jihyun expressed her gratitude, then immediately invited Baek-san to join her team. Baek-san agreed without hesitation. The two shook hands firmly and reached a cooperation, but Hyungjun still had doubts about Baek-san. So he and Eunsu carefully investigated Baek-san's file. He found that Baek-san was not only an experienced bodyguard, but also had a record of being hired to carry out assassination missions. Baek-san previously held Mongolian nationality. This made his identity even more of a mystery. What made Hyungjun even more wary was Baek-san's past combat records on the Iraqi battlefield. He took down one enemy with each shot. During the 2008 Paris bar attack incident, Baek-san was hired to protect the daughter of a Middle Eastern oil tycoon. He handled the brutal gangster's frantic attack with ease, and finally killed all the gangsters, while the tycoon's daughter remained unharmed. Such a top-tier fighter, how could he risk his life to protect Jihyun for no reason? Hyungjun reasonably suspected that Baek-san was a North Korean spy, but Jihyun didn't think so. Later, she went to find Elsie. Elsie analyzed. The world is currently in a period of major changes to the world order. Many countries are forming alliances. This morning, the CIA director arrived in Seoul secretly, but Chaishin couldn't meet with the director because she was on an overseas visit. Elsie thought the director had come to South Korea for Jihyun. If Jack's death was related to the US, then the US would see Jihyun as a thorn in their side. What she would face next would only be more difficult. Elsie told Jihyun, now she must gain more support from the people to have a glimmer of hope and accomplish her great cause. In the evening, Jihyun found Ok-sun and said she wanted to move out. Ok-sun reminded her daughter-in-law not to fall in love with Baek-san, who had saved her twice. Jihyun said firmly she would definitely find out the truth about Jack's death, and Baek-san was the sword in her hand. After hearing this, Ok-sun finally felt relieved. The next day, to ensure Jihyun's safety, Baek-san personally selected a new temporary residence for her, and set strict rules. Only Baek-san could open the door. Windows couldn't be opened casually either, otherwise, it would be easy to become a target for snipers. Baek-san even made the decision without consent, to live in the inner room of Ji-hyun's bedroom. Hyung-jun immediately protested. Ji-hyun quickly mediated, thus avoiding a dispute. Before long, Ok-san went to Ji-hyun's new residence. To check on the situation, Hyung-jun was in charge of receiving her. When Ok-san learned that Baek-san was particularly attentive to Ji-hyun, even cooking for her personally, doubts immediately arose in her mind. She told Hyung-jun to closely monitor every move of Baek-san, and also asked him to do her a favor. Ok-san said seriously. The intelligence service had been monitoring the Jung family. They suspected Jack was a spy. Ok-san asked Hyung-jun to help find the listening devices in the house, and if possible, find out who the listeners were, and whether it had anything to do with her son's death. Hyung-jun was originally part of the Jung family's security company, so he naturally obeyed Ok-san unconditionally. The next day, Ji-hyun gave a speech as usual. The public's response was still enthusiastic, but Baek-san spotted a bearded man at the venue. The man didn't look like a member of the public who had come to listen to the speech at all. He immediately told Hyung-jun about his doubts, but Hyung-jun was unusually cold, dismissing it as Baek-san being overly nervous. Helplessly, Baek-san had to stay very alert. When leaving, he escorted Ji-hyun without leaving her side. He only breathed a little easier after getting her into the car. On the way home, the motorcade hit a major traffic jam. Looking out from the car, the accident vehicle in the distance was clearly an oil tanker. A little girl in a nearby car recognized Ji-hyun and waved excitedly to her through the window. But Baek-san never dared to relax. The next second, he saw the worker repairing the oil tanker make a phone call, and the bearded man from the venue was standing by the road. Baek-san shouted and told the driver to turn around. In the nick of time, Baek-san sharply turned the steering wheel, barely avoiding the bearded man's bomb attack. The scene was in chaos. Worse still, several armed killers were searching for Ji-hyun. Luckily, the professional Baek-san was there. First, he pulled Ji-hyun away from the spot. Taking advantage of the chaos at the scene, he walked against the crowd to the subway station. He told Ji-hyun to turn off her phone, then pulled her into a special passage. The subway rushed past, while protecting Ji-hyun. Baek-san also kept an eye on the surrounding environment. Ji-hyun asked Baek-san how he knew they would be attacked. Baek-san explained patiently. The bearded man at the venue and the oil tanker repair worker both had kukri tattoos on their necks. That is the symbol of the Gurkhas. They are the most brutal soldiers in the world. Ji-hyun continued to ask. This explosion happened because of her. The people who were injured or even killed, should their deaths also be counted against her?
지치면 안 돼요. 우린 이제 막 입구를 지난 것 같습니다.
As a former UN ambassador, Ji-hyun understood this truth well. She just needed a temporary support to rely on. Amid the successive life and death crises, Hyung-jun also saw the news. He immediately took out his phone to contact Ji-hyun, but no one answered. Just then, Woong-soo rushed over. Hyung-jun finally learned that Ji-hyun had been taken away by Baek-san. He immediately ordered his men to search for Ji-hyun, and to subdue Baek-san if necessary. In the evening, Baek-san brought Ji-hyun back to the temporary residence. In the safest way, Hyung-jun blamed Baek-san, saying he should have sent a message to report safety. Even if he turned off the phone, Baek-san knew Hyung-jun never trusted him, and he didn't trust Hyung-jun either. In fact, Baek-san also secretly suspected whether Ji-hyun's successive assassination attempts were related to the mysterious client who hired him. After all, every time they traveled, Baek-san would tell Mark the route, and Mark would pass it on to the mysterious client. Now he called Mark and questioned who the mysterious client was, but Mark either changed the subject or used the employment contract to pressure him. Baek-san suddenly understood everything. He unilaterally broke the contract and smashed the radio Mark had given him to pieces. At the same time, Hyung-jun took professional equipment to Ok-san's house to find listening devices. He quickly made a discovery and immediately exported the content from the device and found it was full of daily conversations between Ji-hyun and Jack when he was alive. He immediately reported to Ok-san and told her an even more shocking piece of news. The signal of the listening device finally pointed to John's computer. Ok-san was both shocked and angry. Hyung-jun quickly comforted her. Luckily, he hadn't found any evidence that Jack was a spy. But Ok-san suddenly changed the subject and mentioned that her son had left all his inheritance to Ji-hyun. Hyung-jun immediately understood what she meant. Ok-san wanted him to monitor Ji-hyun. Seeing Hyung-jun got it, Ok-san immediately put an expensive watch on his wrist. Late at night, Ji-hyun suddenly received a call from Hyung-jun. Hyung-jun said seriously he had received an overdue bill, but the phone number on the bill wasn't in his name. Hyung-jun remembered that 2 months ago, Jack had used a new phone. So Hyung-jun tracked the location and finally found the phone, hidden in the gap of the back seat of Jack's car. Hyung-jun told Ji-hyun he would use an algorithm program to crack it based on Jack's password habits when he was alive, and there would be results before noon. An hour later, Hyung-Jun successfully cracked the phone's password. He was overjoyed, but he put away his smile. After seeing the information in the phone, he thought for a moment, then operated on the computer. Then he picked up his phone and hurried out of the office. The computer screen showed a progress bar for formatting. Coincidentally, Eun-soo saw Hyung-Jun while he was waiting for a traffic light. Eun-soo thought he had successfully unlocked the phone, so she called Hyung-Jun to ask, but the call was hastily hung up after just one ring. Eun-soo was full of doubts, and when she saw Hyung-Jun heading towards Ok-sun's house, she immediately realized something was wrong and drove after him. At this point, Hyung-Jun was trying to contact someone while driving. Hyung-Jun's car rolled over. Eun-soo hurried forward to check the situation, and immediately called the emergency number. When Hyung-Jun was taken to the hospital, he was already on his last breath. When he saw Ji-hyun, he mustered all his strength to say, "I think Jack might really be a spy." Then he was pushed into the emergency room. Ji-hyun was very anxious. During the break, Eun-soo handed Ji-hyun the phone she had found at the scene of the accident. But this secret phone had also been formatted by Hyung-Jun. The clue to Jack's death was broken again. Just as Ji-hyun was falling into confusion, her phone suddenly received a text message from an unknown number. The content was an address and a door lock password. Then a photo was sent. The necklace in the photo was exactly the same as the one Jack had given Ji-hyun. Ji-hyun insisted on going there despite Baek-san's opposition. Baek-san had no choice but to do his best to protect Ji-hyun. He remained on high alert the whole time, but there was no abnormality at all from the journey to the inside of the house. Instead, the house was full of a sense of daily life. Just then, Ji-hyun saw the photos. On the wall, in the photo frame was a group photo of Jack, with an unfamiliar woman and a little boy. Suddenly, the sound of a door being pushed open rang out. A little boy ran in, and he looked exactly like the boy in the photo. The woman in the photo walked in slowly. When she saw Ji-hyun and Baek-san, a smile appeared on her lips. Obviously, it was this woman who had sent the text message to Ji-hyun. The woman's name was Han-nam. The first sentence she said shattered Ji-hyun's hope for the best. She was Jack's lover. The boy was Jack's son. He was 9 years old this year. Then Han-nam got to the point. On the day Jack was killed, she and her son were also at the scene, but Han-nam could only act as a mother protecting her son, unable to rush to Jack and spread her arms like Ji-hyun did. Han-nam didn't even dare to touch the coat Jack left behind. Ji-hyun didn't understand the point of Han-nam saying all this. Han-nam admitted that she would hire a lawyer to file a lawsuit. Jack's illegitimate son would take back the family property that had been taken away. Jack's grandmother would support Han-nam. Although Ji-hyun was angry, she still tried to calmly persuade Han-nam not to make it public. She could give Han-nam more money, but Han-nam wasn't doing this for money. She was doing it to tell the whole world that she loved Jack. Ji-hyun was completely speechless and gave up persuading Han-nam.
나 원래 약한 사람하고 안 싸우는데요. 싸워야 하는 상황이 있으면 가만히 있지 않을 거예요.
What made Ji-hyun even more frustrated was that the necklace her husband had given her was actually designed by Han-nam. Ji-hyun rushed to question her mother-in-law angrily why she had been hiding this from her all along. If Jack were still alive, Ji-hyun would definitely divorce him immediately. But Ok-sun still responded calmly, saying she could understand her daughter-in-law's feelings, and this incident was even a good opportunity. An opportunity to show Ji-hyun's vulnerability and make the public like her. An opportunity to prove that a mistress couldn't replace the legal spouse and make Ji-hyun move forward firmly. But Ji-hyun absolutely didn't approve of this method. She also understood that Ok-sun would do anything to achieve her goal. She cut off relations with her mother-in-law and tore up the contract in front of her. Just then, her grandmother-in-law walked in and kept mentioning that Han-nam had given the Zhang family an heir. Ji-hyun didn't get angry. She just calmly called Eun-soo and told her to donate all the Zhang family's inheritance. Her grandmother-in-law was furious and slapped Ji-hyun, and this slap completely broke Ji-hyun's heart. In the evening, Ji-hyun went to the lake to relieve her boredom. She picked up Baek-san's gun, wanting to relieve her inner depression through shooting. Baek-san patiently taught her the correct way to hold the gun. After going back to the safe house, Ji-hyun expressed her gratitude. This also meant that she truly began to trust Baek-san. Elsie was analyzing the tense situation on the Korean peninsula in class. He advised young people to take to the streets to oppose the war, but the young people in the audience laughed at him for being alarmist, saying ordinary people could do nothing about it. After the lecture, Elsie went home as usual, but unexpectedly was besieged by radical students. When Ji-hyun found out, she hurried to the hospital to visit her teacher, but when Elsie saw her, he ignored his injuries and told Ji-hyun the latest news. Chai Shin should have fully sided with the US not long ago. bunker buster missiles designed specifically to target North Korea had been stockpiled in Okinawa. U.S. strategic nuclear submarines had also set sail for the Korean peninsula. Most crucially, the U.S. was evacuating its citizens. If a specific U.S. radio station plays Christmas carols, it will mean action will begin within 12 hours.
확실한 정보인가요?
그릇된 정보를 엄청 뺐구나.
As soon as he finished speaking, a large group of men in black rushed into the hospital, planning to take Elsie away. Baek-san took them down. Ji-hyun also asked the men in black to show an arrest warrant, but Elsie told them to stop. He gave Ji-hyun a look, and then left with the men in black. After Ji-hyun went back to the safe house, Eun-soo excitedly told her she had cracked the password of the encrypted email website. Through clues found on Jack's phone, Eun-soo immediately entered the password and logged into the website. She found another secret letter from the U.S. Secretary of State's assistant to Jack. 1 month ago, 3 South Korean naval officers defected to the U.S. side. From what they said, North Korea's nuclear submarines were very advanced, 10,000-ton ballistic missile submarines. Based on their descriptions, U.S. analysts drew the general shape of the nuclear submarines, and finally found similar submarines via satellite. The U.S. Secretary of State immediately took corresponding actions, but the assistant thought something was wrong. Which country would build such advanced nuclear submarines without leaking any information at all? Both Jack and the assistant suspected that the 3 South Korean naval officers were lying, but the next day, one of the naval officers shot and killed the other 2, and then took his own life. The U.S. side didn't find out the reason behind this, but still firmly believed the 3 naval officers' claims, and didn't cancel the military operation against the Korean peninsula. The assistant had advised the U.S. president to stop, but it had no effect, so he decided to find out the truth himself. After several days of investigation, the assistant found a name appearing repeatedly. This person had imported structural steel plates from Poland, precision sensors from Switzerland, and even hired Swedish engineers. The person's name was Stella Yang. He was an American arms lobbyist. The assistant immediately pulled up Stella Yang's passport, only to find that there was no photo on the passport. From the entry and exit records, Stella Yang got into South Korea 10 years ago, and there had been no entry or exit records since then. The assistant suspected that Stella Yang was still in South Korea. He asked Jack to find Stella Yang and stop the war. 3 weeks later, Jack sent an email to the assistant, saying he had found clues about Stella Yang, and that once he figured out the whole story, he would send a letter to the assistant immediately. 2 days later, Jack was assassinated. While Ji-hyun and the others were resting, they saw the news on TV. A U.S. Ohio-class strategic nuclear submarine had arrived at the Busan Naval Base. This kind of public military move was very rare, and this once again confirmed Elsie's prediction that a war was about to break out. Ji-hyun didn't dare to delay. She hurried to ask Chai-shin if the news Elsie had mentioned was true, but Chai-shin didn't explain. Ji-hyun had no choice but to leave. The next day, she visited the Chinese ambassador to South Korea, trying to get information from him.
You cannot fathom this, Ambassador, because you have never seen something truly vast.
Ji-hyun said that she would do her best to stop the war. In the evening, Ji-hyun arrived at the speech venue under Baek-san's escort. She publicly exposed the war conspiracy, saying that the Korean peninsula might be burned to the ground. As soon as these words were spoken, the crowd at the scene erupted in an uproar. But a sniper also took aim at Ji-hyun. Soon after, a large number of special police officers also arrived at the scene. Ji-hyun wasn't flustered at all. Instead, she gave an even more impassioned speech. In the end, she started a video call with the U.S. Secretary of State's assistant. The assistant played a video of the defected South Korean naval officer. The soldier said he had never seen a North Korean nuclear submarine with his own eyes. Everything he had said was perjury instructed by the chief engineer. The next second, all lines were cut off, and the special police began to enter. It was obvious that someone was panicking. Ji-hyun endured the pressure and continued to call on the people to wake up. At this point, Baek-san drove a truck into the venue with one hand, grabbed Ji-hyun, and started fleeing. He noticed the reflection from the sniper scope across the way, so he pounced on Ji-hyun and saved her life again. The two escaped by speedboat, but the sniper still refused to give up on the target, and finally revealed his true identity. He was Hongyu, the top mercenary who had gotten into the country earlier. Baek-san took out gauze and told Ji-hyun to press it against her wound. After reaching a completely safe place, Baek-san immediately treated Ji-hyun's wound, then he took her back to his own safe house. Baek-san was planning to cook, but heard Ji-hyun scream. It turned out she wanted to wash her hair, but couldn't hold the shower head steadily due to her injured arm, so Baek-san gently washed Ji-hyun's hair, and also cooked her a hearty dinner. At the same time, Chai-shin held a press conference and said that everything Ji-hyun had said was true. He called on the people to oppose the war. It turned out, Ji-hyun had told Chai-shin that the nuclear submarines didn't exist the night before, and hoped that Chai Shin would help her put on a show. After careful consideration, the president agreed to Ji-hyun's request, but this move betrayed the US. At this point, Baek-san and Ji-hyun were chatting. After going through so much together, the feelings between them finally began to deepen, and they finally kissed. At this point, the pop music on the radio suddenly turned into a Christmas carol. Ji-hyun was very sad. She had sacrificed so much, but still couldn't stop the war. But Baek-san told her to cheer up, not to give up until the very end. At the same time, a shrill siren sounded over Seoul. A stealth fighter had already flown into South Korean airspace, and in an unknown sea area, a nuclear submarine was heading somewhere. But not long after, the stealth fighter was shot down immediately by an anti-aircraft missile when it flew into North Korean airspace. The next day, North Korea officially released the video of its nuclear submarine. U.S. senior officials were stunned after watching the video. This nuclear submarine was completely different from what they had expected. It was a modified old Russian submarine. It couldn't withstand the pressure of missile launches at all, and had little practical functionality. Just then, North Korea strongly condemned the U.S. for the stealth fighter's intrusion into its airspace. They took a tough stance, saying they would never sit idle and wait for disaster. After the meeting, the U.S. Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs told the Secretary of State the video of the South Korean naval officer's defection was spreading like wildfire. The Secretary of State immediately interrupted him. The nuclear submarine issue was no longer important. This was a showdown between democracy and tyranny. If the U.S. chose to back down, it would be equivalent to surrendering the future to a dictatorial regime. Chai Shin received a secret call. The mysterious caller spoke fluent English, telling Chai Shin to ensure Ji-hyun wouldn't cause any more trouble.
I understand, Mr. President.
After hanging up the phone, Chai Shin immediately held a press conference, emphasizing that no matter what happened, the South Korean government would protect the safety of its citizens. Ji-hyun and Baek-san also saw this report. Baek-san breathed a sigh of relief, but Ji-hyun knew very well, they had only survived the first wave of crisis. After the press conference, the director of the intelligence service handed Chai Shin a file. It was the public's response to the government's statement. Most people firmly believed that Ji-hyun had stopped the war. The director reminded Chai Shin, if a public opinion poll were conducted at this point, Ji-hyun's approval rating would definitely soar sharply, and Chai Shin's position as president would be at risk. Just as Chai Shin was about to say something, the director suddenly suggested taking action against Ji-hyun. He had been investigating Ji-hyun for a long time, but Chai Shin didn't respond directly. When Ji-hyun received a call from Eun-soo telling her that Hyung-jun had woken up, she quickly started a video call. Hyung-jun said seriously, earlier, when he unlocked Jack's phone, he found several unread messages, so he clicked to check them, and unexpectedly found a video of Jack receiving a medal at North Korea's National Founding Day. But Jack never showed his full face in the video, only the presenter kept repeating his name. Hyung-jun was very worried, so he contacted the person who sent the video. The other person asked to meet Hyung-jun at Hyereundong, and then something happened to Hyung-jun. Baek-san analyzed, to get to Hyereundong, one must pass through the Morning Light Tunnel, and Hyung-jun was attacked right after exiting the tunnel. Upon hearing this, Ji-hyun suddenly remembered that, on the day Hyung-jun had the accident, she and Baek-san had gone to Han-nam's house in Hyereundong. Baek-san thought for a moment, and put forward a bold guess. Han-nam might be Stella Yang. Ji-hyun asked Hyung-jun to send over the phone number of the person who had sent the video, but she froze when she saw the number, because this phone number was exactly the same as the one on the soldier's card. Hyung-jun suddenly remembered. He had seen a similar photo in Jack's phone before, so he sent the photo to Ji-hyun. Baek-san felt a chill after thinking carefully. He wanted Ji-hyun to leave South Korea immediately, but Ji-hyun didn't agree right away. She told Baek-san, Jack had wanted to tell her something on the day he died. He probably wanted to explain why he had become a spy. Maybe Jack had really had no choice. While the two were arguing, Eun-soo called again, telling Ji-hyun to check the news. It turned out Ji-hyun had been monitored. The recording of her and Baek-san's intimate moment last night had already made the news. Han-nam had a playful look on her face when she saw the news, and Ok-sun would naturally not miss the good opportunity to suppress Ji-hyun. She told her men to report to her every 3 hours. On the reports about Ji-hyun, Baek-san carefully searched every corner of the residence, but found no trace of any listening devices. Ji-hyun told Baek-san that she didn't regret what had happened last night. If this country gave up on her, she could leave. Baek-san thought for a moment and planned to go somewhere. He told Ji-hyun to stay in the cabin, and left his gun with her for self-defense. At this point, Han-nam took the initiative to meet Ok-sun. She made a long preparation before mentioning that Jack wasn't Ok-sun's biological son. Ok-sun wasn't angry. Instead, she admitted it calmly, but she said firmly she would always regard Jack as her biological son. After going back to the house, Ok-sun called the director and said she wanted to meet with him to discuss something. At the same time, Ji Hyun was repeatedly listening to the recording that was going viral online. Suddenly, she heard a clear strange sound, and suddenly remembered that, when she had been intimate with Baek-san earlier, she had dropped his necklace into a cup. More memories then flooded her mind. Ji Hyun had actually modified that necklace. It could record normally even without a battery. At this point, Baek-san had broken into Mark's office. He stabbed a sharp object into Mark's thigh, and forced him to reveal how many listening devices had been installed. Just then, several men in black burst in suddenly. They pointed their guns at Baek-san and said they would arrest him on charges of espionage. The next second, the director of the intelligence service walked in slowly. He claimed Baek-san was a spy sent by North Korea.
그 여자를 사랑에 빠지게 하는 것도 계획이었나?
Baek-san trembled with anger. He erupted in resistance and grabbed one of the men in black, but the director remained calm. He took out a photo of Baek-san's grandmother and said, as long as Baek-san obeyed, he would let the elderly woman go. The director told Baek-san to take Ji Hyun on a designated ship the next night. His men would appear at the right time and arrest Ji Hyun on the spot, on charges of attempted defection, and Baek-san would be declared to have fled by jumping into the sea. After that, Baek-san could take his grandmother anywhere she wanted to go. Helpless, Baek-san had no choice but to compromise, but their conversation had already been transmitted to Ji Hyun through the bug hidden in the necklace. Later, Baek-san was beaten by the men in black, and the necklace was smashed. When he saw the bug hidden inside the necklace, Baek-san immediately realized Ji Hyun had heard everything that happened here. He suddenly attacked, and took down the men in black in the elevator. Then he hurried back to the cabin to look for Ji Hyun, but no matter how hard he searched, he couldn't find her. So Baek-san went to find Mark again. Under threat, Mark revealed the person who had hired Baek-san to protect Ji Hyun was actually Stella Yang. Baek-san threatened Mark to find out all information about Stella Yang as soon as possible. Only then could Mark live safely until retirement. At this point, Ji Hyun was very confused. She didn't know if Baek-san's feelings for her were real or not, but no matter what the truth was, she could no longer trust Baek-san as she used to. In the end, Ji Hyun decided to escape from the cabin. She didn't know how long she had been running. Ji Hyun lay on the ground, gasping for breath. She looked at the North Star in the night sky, and tears couldn't help but fall. Just then, Ji Hyun received a video about the nuclear submarine. She was both shocked and confused, so she immediately sent a message to ask for the sender's identity, but the mysterious sender didn't reply, only telling her to meet at Jinchue port at 10 p.m. the day after tomorrow. The next day, Ji Hyun met up with Eun-soo and Hyung-jun. They immediately started a video call with Tae-woo, the Secretary of State's assistant. Hyung-jun repeatedly verified the video using a deepfake detection program. He found that the video sent to Ji Hyun by the mysterious sender had an authenticity rate of up to 98%. Tae-woo also brought new information. The chief engineer had woken up and told the truth. In the past 5 years, North Korea had built 2 submarines in succession. The one announced to the public was to confuse the intelligence agencies of other countries, while the nuclear submarine with actual combat capability was hidden. Tae-woo also believed that someone had sent him the nuclear submarine video earlier to exploit his patriotism, making him try his best to prove that the nuclear submarine didn't exist, thereby preventing the outbreak of war. After hanging up the call, Ji Hyun suggested going to Jinchue port alone, but was strongly opposed by Eun-soo. Eun-soo thought Ji Hyun should go abroad immediately, but Hyung-jun calmly pointed out Ji Hyun was definitely on the no-fly list. Eun-soo said she could arrange for Ji Hyun to smuggle out of the country, but Ji Hyun clearly said that she didn't want to leave South Korea now. Taking advantage of the time when Eun-soo was answering a call, she went to Jinchue port with Hyung-jun. Looking at the complex terrain here, Hyung-jun decided to first survey the surrounding area. Just then, Ji Hyun noticed someone was following her. She quietly followed the person, and unexpectedly saw Baek-san on the deck. Baek-san hurriedly pulled her to hide in a secluded spot, but Ji Hyun no longer trusted him. She warned Baek-san not to follow her anymore, otherwise, she would shoot without hesitation. After saying that, she ran away quickly. She held back her emotions and found Hyung-jun. The two quickly left by car. In the car, Hyung-jun took the initiative to talk about Baek-san. He changed his previous attitude and said that only Baek-san could protect Ji Hyun well, but Ji Hyun said firmly Baek-san wouldn't come back anymore. After going back to the safe house, Eun-soo hurried to report to Ji Hyun. Argentine lawyer Kim Ha-suk wanted to meet Ji Hyun. Ji Hyun didn't refuse. After everyone met, Kim Ha-suk got straight to the point. 5 years ago, he was entrusted by Jack to establish 4 shell companies in Argentina, but Jack was too busy to continue the plan, so he asked Kim Ha-suk to help manage the companies. Later, when Kim Ha-suk learned of Jack's death, he was very troubled, because Jack was about to pay the legal fees, but no one could do anything about this kind of situation. Later, when Kim Ha-suk saw that Ji Hyun was constantly being attacked, he suddenly understood everything. Although South Korean media all believed the attacks on Ji Hyun were all driven by political factors, but Kim Ha-suk thought the people who attacked Ji Hyun must be Jack's family members, because the 4 shell companies under Jack's name were now worth 2 trillion won. Kim Ha-suk also revealed that the agent of the shell companies was named Stella Yang, and confessed his real purpose for coming here to Ji-hyun. He wanted to be Ji-hyun's lawyer, and help her fight for this money. If he succeeded in the end, he wanted a 1% commission. 1% of 2 trillion won is 20 billion won. Unexpectedly, Ji-hyun said that as long as Kim Ha-suk found out the capital flow of the shell companies, she was willing to give him a 5% commission. At this point, Han Nam, who was suspected of being Stella Yang, was putting on makeup. She put on the necklace she had designed, and also put a poison pill into her bag. Then she drove to the police station, facing more than a dozen reporters. She took the initiative to admit that she was the one who had made Ji-hyun and Baek San's intimate relationship public, because Han Nam firmly believed that Ji-hyun had killed Jack. As soon as these words were spoken, the scene erupted in an uproar. Baek San, who saw Han Nam's live broadcast, silently loaded his pistol, then walked out of his house with a solemn expression. In the evening, Han Nam went back to her residence. Suddenly, footsteps were heard from behind. The person who came was exactly Baek San. He said that he was looking for Stella Yang. Seeing Han Nam didn't respond, Baek San took action immediately. In fact, he had already found out that Han Nam wasn't Stella Yang. She was just a woman who wanted her child to inherit a huge fortune. Seeing her identity and purpose completely exposed, Han Nam tried to end her life with the poison pill, but was stopped by Baek San in time. The two then got into a fight. Baek San advised Han Nam to think carefully. She could end her life, but what about her child? Han Nam thought carefully, and temporarily reached a cooperation with Baek San. Later, Baek San rushed to South Korea's best hospital. The director of the intelligence service walked in. It turned out his son was seriously ill, and was only barely alive with the help of medical equipment. But as soon as the director got into the ward, he saw Baek San in the shadows. But he didn't panic. Baek San asked why the intelligence service had accused Ji-hyun of being a spy. The director no longer hid anything, saying that the intelligence service would label anyone who went against national interests as a spy. Baek San suddenly realized the person who wanted to kill Ji-hyun wasn't the president of any country, but someone who could seek their own interests, regardless of whether a war broke out or not. Later, Baek San wanted to make a deal with the director. As long as the director told him who wanted to kill Ji-hyun, he would help the director catch the real spy. In the end, the two finalized the cooperation. At the same time, Hyung-jun confessed to Ji-hyun that he had tampered with Ji-hyun's phone before, but he had only done so to find out who had killed Jack. After hearing this, Ji-hyun didn't blame him too much. Later, Eun-soo found Ji-hyun. She had already arranged a smuggling route for Ji-hyun. In this way, Ji-hyun could successfully get the 2 trillion won in assets. Seeing Ji-hyun look hesitant, Eun-soo didn't persuade her further. Instead, she mentioned that Elsie had been released. After learning this, Ji-hyun made a special trip to see Elsie the next day. She told Elsie that she was going to leave South Korea. Elsie was very surprised and quickly asked for details, but Ji-hyun suddenly invited him to leave together. Unexpectedly, Elsie refused directly. Ji-hyun didn't persuade him further. Instead, she picked up a book from the table and asked Elsie to sign it for her as a memento. But just as Elsie bowed his head to sign, Ji-hyun suddenly pulled out a gun and pointed it at him. Then she tied Elsie's hands and forced him into the car. The two drove to the beach. Ji-hyun dialed the phone number on the card. The next second, the phone in Elsie's pocket started vibrating. It turned out that Ji-hyun, based on many details, had found out that Elsie was a secretary of the National Intelligence Service. Elsie also admitted his identity, and confessed that claims like Jack is a spy, and Ji-hyun's father is a spy, were all made up by him. The invitation to Jinchue port tonight was also a carefully designed trap by him. As long as Ji-hyun was arrested, the intelligence service would portray her as a daughter avenging her spy father, and all people in South Korea would support the war.
내가 만들고 싶은 대한민국이다.
Later, Elsie also said that even though Ji-hyun's father was tortured severely, he didn't falsely accuse anyone, and that people like Ji-hyun's father were the ones he hated the most. As soon as he finished speaking, Elsie suddenly broke free and pounced on Ji-hyun, trying to snatch the gun from her hand. The next second, a bullet hit Elsie's ear. Baek San walked over quickly, telling Elsie to inform the person behind the scenes that Ji-hyun wouldn't smuggle out of the country from Jinchue port tonight, but would leave South Korea from Mora port instead. In the evening, Ji-hyun waited silently at Mora port, but it was Ok-sun and Han Nam who showed up. The atmosphere at the scene became tense instantly, but Ok-sun, relying on having more people, wasn't flustered at all. But what she didn't know was, Ji-hyun had already asked Hyung-jun and Eun-soo to monitor, one for audio, one for video, preparing to cooperate with her to obtain evidence of Ok-sun's crimes. To get Ok-sun to reveal key evidence, Ji-hyun mentioned that every Mother's Day, Jack would buy peonies, Ok-sun's favorite flowers, and that Jack often quarreled with her over matters related to Ok-sun. Although Ok-sun was somewhat Shaken, she still didn't say anything. She told Hannam to take action directly, but Hannam hesitated greatly. She remembered that Jack had been silenced just because he found out Ok-sun's real identity, and that Ok-sun's real identity was Stella Yang. Thinking of this, Hannam suddenly turned her gun and pointed it at Ok-sun. Just then, people from the National Intelligence Service suddenly rushed in. The director immediately ordered, "Leave no one alive." But the next second, all the lights suddenly went out, several smoke grenades were thrown into the scene, gunshots rang out from all directions, the scene became very chaotic in an instant. The director told his men to catch Ji-hyun no matter what. Just then, Baek-san got into the scene amid the chaos. He took a bullet and jumped into the vast sea with Ji-hyun. Baek-san ignored his injured body and swam to her side with all his strength. In the end, the two successfully emerged from the water. The director immediately ordered his men to surround the nearby sea area and intercept all ships leaving Mora port. But after a thorough search, there was no sign of Baek-san and Ji-hyun. The director ordered the closure of surrounding roads and deployed helicopters and drones to find Baek-san and Ji-hyun at all costs. He also emphasized that Chai-shin was paying close attention to this matter. At this point, Baek-san had already driven Ji-hyun a long way away, but the intelligence service had set up many checkpoints. Helplessly, Baek-san had to turn around immediately and took Ji-hyun to an abandoned house in the outskirts. Suddenly, Ji-hyun remembered that Jack had always talked about peaches when he was alive. There might be some hidden meaning behind it. Just then, Ji-hyun remembered something else, so she took Baek-san to a temple. No one else knew about this temple except Ji-hyun and Jack. When the abbot saw Ji-hyun, he immediately handed her a key and said she should have come earlier. A young monk beside him brought an locked wooden box. Ji-hyun opened the box with the key and found a USB drive and a letter inside. In the letter, Jack confessed that he had a child with Hannam and planned to announce his withdrawal from the election on the night of the mass and expose Ok-sun's real identity and true purpose to everyone. Jack had long had a premonition that he might lose his life because of this, so he specially left this letter in USB drive, hoping Ji-hyun could use this evidence to protect herself. Finally, Jack reminded Ji-hyun to be careful of Ok-sun, saying Ok-sun was much more terrifying than Ji-hyun thought. After reading the letter, Ji-hyun was filled with mixed emotions. She silently burned the letter and thought about what to do next. At the same time, Ok-sun was also following the news about Baek-san and Ji-hyun. She wanted Ji-hyun to be arrested in front of the whole nation, to intensify conflicts and trigger a war, and now, her plan was about to succeed, but there was no joy on her face, and the nuclear submarine she had built was still sailing in an unknown sea area. After going back home, the servant immediately reported to Ok-sun that Hannam and her child were missing. Ok-sun flew into a rage instantly. She said she would find Hannam and her child, no matter what it cost. At this point, Hannam and her child were hiding in the basement of a church. It was dark and dim here, but the mother and son were very happy, because there were no conspiracies or schemes here. At the same time, Elsie, who was under police protection, was eating. Suddenly, he began to twitch all over and couldn't breathe. It was obvious that he had been poisoned. The director received the news soon after. He immediately discussed countermeasures with Ok-sun. The tricky thing was, there was no record of Elsie in the National Intelligence Services system at all, as if he had never existed. But after investigation by the National Forensic Service, the drug that poisoned Elsie was the same as the one soldiers used to end their own lives. Ok-sun suspected that Ji-hyun was the murderer of this case, but the director thought the murderer was someone else. The first person to suspect Jack was a spy was John. Earlier, John found that Jack had contacted North Korea using the home phone, and also found that Jack had transferred a sum of money to a North Korean bank. Only then did he conclude that Jack was suspected of being a spy, and reported it to the director. The director stood up and said seriously, the call to North Korea from Jack's house might have been made by someone else.
지금 저를 의심하는 건가요?
The director explained, Ok-sun's shipping company under her command had been doing business with North Korea since 2009. This made him have to suspect Ok-sun, and now John had gone back to the country and was in the intelligence service right now. The director proposed to let Ok-sun and John confront each other face to face so that the truth could be found out. After saying that, he fell silent for a moment, then tested Ok-sun again, saying that there was often only a fine line between patriots and spies, and that he was preparing an operation against North Korea. Ok-sun immediately understood what the director meant. The other person wanted to get her involved in the operation. Ok-sun said calmly she would help him as long as the director arrested Ji-hyun. After saying that, she left with John in the car. The mother and son remained silent the whole way. Finally, John couldn't help but ask Ok-sun if she was the one who made that call to North Korea. But Ok-sun didn't answer. Instead, she confessed that Jack wasn't her biological son, she only had John as her biological son. Ji-hyun was in a video call with Taewoo and Kim Ha-suk. The three of them analyzed Ok-sun's fund flows together. They they found that her company was a middleman, which had been helping North Korea sell weapons to a certain country in the Middle East, and the country's president, Lee Shah, used these weapons to wage war against the US. Combined with the data in Jack's USB drive, the group finally sorted out the clues. Ok-sun had been cooperating with the US Secretary of State, exporting weapons from both the US and North Korea to hostile countries. This was also the reason why North Korea could still possess so many advanced weapons, despite more than 20 years of severe sanctions. As long as the US went to war with hostile countries, the Secretary of State and Ok-sun could gain huge profits from it. Ji-hyun planned to tell Chai-shin about this matter. If Chai-shin relayed this news to the US president, the US might abandon the idea of going to war. A few hours later, Hyun-jun reported to Ji-hyun, Eun-soo would be released. Soon after saying that, he hurried to pick up Eun-soo by car, but due to traffic jams, he didn't arrive at the police station entrance in time. At this time, Eun-soo had already walked out of the police station. She had just called Hyun-jun when she was hit by a car and taken away. Hyun-jun hurried to report the situation to Ji-hyun. Just then, Ji-hyun received a call from Ok-sun. It turned out this was another conspiracy of Ok-sun. She told Ji-hyun to take Han-nam's child, Young-seon, to a designated location, otherwise, she would kill Eun-soo. After hanging up the phone, Ji-hyun immediately found Han-nam. She told Han-nam to escape with Young-seon quickly. Han-nam wanted Ji-hyun to escape with them. The current situation was really too complicated. Lee Shah had officially declared war on the US, that nuclear submarine had already set off for the Pacific Ocean, and was expected to be delivered to Lee Shah within a day. Suddenly, Baek-san pushed the door open and walked in. He had a serious expression, telling Ji-hyun and Han-nam to take action quickly. At this point, Chai-shin was re-investigating the Ji-hyun murder case. She thought there was something fishy about this case. The director standing beside her changed his expression slightly when he heard this. Half a minute later, Chai-shin also saw Idish's declaration of war video.
국정쪽 제기급 선문제를 따로 만나야겠어요.
When Han-nam was leaving, she suddenly held Ji-hyun back. She said with guilt, in fact, the story about the necklace was made up by herself. Back then, she saw Jack buy one for Ji-hyun, so she made a replica for herself. In fact, Jack had never loved Han-nam. He came to see her every week only to see Young-seon. After saying that, Han-nam left with her son. Baek-san also packed his equipment and left the church basement. Ji-hyun discussed with Tae-woo what to do next. Just then, Tae-woo suddenly noticed movement outside the house. He picked up the binoculars to check. Sure enough, he found a strange car parked not far away. It was obviously monitoring him, but Tae-woo had no time to worry about his own safety now, because Lee Shah was planning to launch a nuclear missile at the US within 24 hours, and the only way now was to freeze Idish's or Ok-sun's bank accounts, so that they couldn't complete the transaction. Later, Ji-hyun drove on the road and told Baek-san that she was going to meet Ok-sun. She hoped Baek-san would go to meet Chai-shin and tell the South Korean president about Idish's transaction with North Korea, so that Chai-shin could find a way to prevent the war. For the sake of the country, Baek-san had to agree. Soon, Ji-hyun met with Ok-sun. Learning that Young-seon had left South Korea, Ok-sun called the doctor and told him to kill Eun-soo. Hearing this, Ji-hyun quickly took out a document. The document was an agreement for Han-nam and Young-seon to give up Jack's property. She also said, as long as Ok-sun released Eun-soo, she would let Ok-sun do whatever she wanted with her. After thinking for a moment, Ok-sun agreed to Ji-hyun's proposal. She immediately told the doctor to abort the operation, and took Ji-hyun on a private helicopter. Later, they arrived at a cargo ship. John couldn't help but ask his mother what they were going to do, but Ok-sun didn't answer directly.
오늘 나를 방해하는 사람은 누구도 무사하지 않을 거야. 네 형도 그렇게 죽었고.
Upon hearing these words, John froze in place. He tried his best not to overthink. Then he took Ji-hyun, who was beaten black and blue, out of the vehicle. Ji-hyun knew very well that John was the only one who could stop Ok-sun now. She tried to arouse his conscience, but before Ji-hyun could finish speaking, John slapped her and took Ji-hyun into the control room. Ok-sun slowly opened her mouth and talked about the past. Back then, she was forced to flee to the US, but she stood out at a charity auction. Ok-sun found that she was very good at socializing and manipulating people's minds. The CIA also valued this trait in her, so they asked Ok-sun to assist US defense contractors in selling weapons to the South Korean government. During this process, Ok-sun understood the rules of how the world works. She had a bold idea to build a submarine that could launch nuclear weapons without being detected and become the world's top arms dealer. She held the privileges granted by the US and also had channels for secret contacts with North Korea, so she chose the hidden sea area of Asahi to secretly manufacture the world's most advanced weapons here. Finally, she successfully built the nuclear submarine she had long dreamed of, and finalized the cooperation with Lee Shah. As long as Lee Shah had this big killer weapon, he would have the capital to confront the US. But Ok-sun knew very well, Lee Shah was a coward who looked strong but was actually weak. He would never dare to launch a nuclear missile. As she spoke, okay. Sun opened a suitcase. She told Ji-hyun, as long as she entered the launch code, she could commit the most destructive crime in human history. Only then did Ji-hyun understand what her husband had said before. Ok-sun was truly terrifying. At the same time, Baek-san deliberately crashed into the director's car and tied plastic explosives to the director. The police arrived at the scene soon after. To prove that the explosives were real, Baek-san pressed the remote control right away, detonating the explosives he had hidden in the director's house in advance.
대통령님을 뵙고 싶습니다.
But Baek-san didn't expect that the director was also a lunatic. The director even told his men to ignore him and shoot Baek-san. Baek-san knew Chai-shin was monitoring the scene, so he shouted and begged the president to give him 1 minute to explain the situation. Countless lives depended on it. Upon hearing this, Chai-shin rushed to the scene immediately. Baek-san untied the explosives from the director. The president then gave him 1 minute to explain his purpose, but Baek-san mentioned the date of August 13, 2007, and also brought up a French novelist. No one present understood the meaning behind this. Chai-shin also told the police to arrest Baek-san. The director put on an arrogant expression and said that Baek-san's grandmother had passed away 2 days ago, and that all this was because Baek-san didn't listen to the advice back then. Baek-san flew into a rage instantly upon hearing this, but there was nothing he could do to the director right now. A few minutes later, Chai-shin actually summoned Baek-san secretly. It turned out she had understood what Baek-san had just said. August 13, 2007, was the day of the four-party peace talks on the Korean peninsula. At that time, the negotiations could break down at any time, and Ji-hyun had used a quote from a French novelist to attract the attention of the negotiating representatives from other countries. Then she handed a note to Chai-shin. It was precisely by relying on the strategy on the note that Chai-shin stabilized the situation and finally achieved success. Chai-shin asked Baek-san if he had brought Ji-hyun's new note. Baek-san didn't beat around the bush and told her everything he knew. Before long, personnel from the Criminal Investigation Department rushed into the director's office. It turned out Chai-shin had already found out that Ji-hyun had been framed, and now that she had learned the latest information, she was ready to take action. After the director was arrested, Chai-shin immediately informed the US president of the information about the nuclear submarine. At this point, Tae-woo was still struggling with the matter of freezing the accounts, but just as he got a clue, a group of vehicles suddenly stopped at his doorstep. The next second, a dozen fully armed special operations soldiers rushed in and took Tae-woo to a top-secret detention room. The US president immediately got on a call with Tae-woo. Tae-woo hurriedly told him all the investigation results from the past few days. After listening, the US president finally believed the authenticity of the crisis and asked Tae-woo how to resolve the crisis now.
Freeze the funds from Idisha to North Korea. Stop the transfer from happening.
This operation was a piece of cake for the US president. The most crucial thing was that there was no risk at all. He immediately gave the order to carry it out. Half a minute later, okay. Sun's lackey reported to John, all their payment accounts had been frozen. John's face turned pale instantly. Inside the control room, Ji-hyun also revealed a secret. Because Ok-sun had opposed Jack and Ji-hyun's marriage back then, Jack had investigated his mother. He found out that Ok-sun wasn't his biological mother, and also found out Ok-sun's real past. She was a child from a poor family. At the age of 9, Ok-sun's mother ran away with an American soldier. Ok-sun had to make a living by doing odd jobs. Since then, she had vowed to become the most powerful person in the world and take the craziest revenge on those who had hurt her. But when she grew up, she couldn't find that American soldier or her own mother, so she set the US as her revenge target. John pushed the door open and told Ok-sun about the frozen accounts, but the next second,
장준익 살해 혐의로 체포하겠습니다.
It turned out that earlier, John had monitored all of Ok-sun's calls and learned that his brother wasn't a spy. And after Ok-sun killed Jack, John repented and decided to help Ji-hyun. Just then, Ok-sun's man rushed in. He anxiously said that the Coast Guard was surrounding the ship and told Ok-sun to evacuate quickly. John took the opportunity to untie Ji-hyun and took her to escape from the control room. John knew that the phone in Ok-sun's room could call North Korea, so he headed there, but unexpectedly was shot in the thigh by a man in black. He took out a card with a phone number written on it and told Ji-hyun to continue the mission, to contact the North Korean leader and tell them to turn the submarine around. At the same time, countless Coast Guard officers and special police officers had already boarded the ship and started a fierce gunfight with Ok-sun's men. Ji-hyun seized the opportunity to cross the line of fire, but was still targeted by someone. She quickly hid but was found by the mysterious person, but when he took off his mask, it was actually Baek-san's face. With Baek-san's help, Ji-hyun quickly reached Ok-sun's bedroom and contacted the North Korean leader. She clearly told the other person that Ok-sun's accounts had been frozen and the transaction wouldn't continue. The North Korean leader was silent for a moment, then seriously told Ji-hyun the nuclear submarine was now out of contact. The worst part was, if the nuclear submarine got into the designated area, Ok-sun could launch the nuclear missile via the suitcase. The North Korean leader also mentioned, Ok-sun had most likely set up a dead man switch. As he spoke, the signal became intermittent, and finally cut off completely. At the same time, several fighter jets were rapidly approaching the cargo ship. Ok-sun immediately walked quickly to the control room, and flipped a switch. Then, under the cover of her personal bodyguards, she went to the upper deck of the ship. She opened the suitcase she was carrying, and quickly entered a string of passwords. The launch hatch of the nuclear submarine opened accordingly. Just as Ok-sun was about to press the launch button, Baek-san, who had rushed over, shot her in the shoulder, facing the gun. Ok-sun wasn't flustered at all. She said that as long as she died, the nuclear submarine would launch the missile within 10 minutes. At this point, Ok-sun seemed to see the scene of the nuclear missile exploding. She ended her own life in her illusory fantasy. When Ji-hyun and Baek-san found the control room, there were only 3 minutes and 40 seconds left before the missile launch. Baek-san told Ji-hyun to contact Lee-Sha immediately. While he walked into the control room himself, after learning about Ok-sun's crazy actions, Lee-Sha revealed the password to cancel the missile launch. Baek-san entered the password in sequence, and successfully prevented this global crisis. But the next second, a new countdown appeared on the screen. Baek-san immediately closed the iron gate of the control room. He seriously told Ji-hyun this was the countdown for the ship's self-destruction, and there was a pressure release bomb inside the control room. As long as he left the control room, or someone forced their way in, the bomb would explode immediately. Looking at the anxious Ji-hyun, Baek-san told her to evacuate everyone on the ship immediately, while he would find a way to defuse the bomb. For the safety of everyone on the ship, Ji-hyun turned around and told the special police the news at the fastest speed. But the police didn't go to save Baek-san. Instead, they forced Ji-hyun to leave the cargo ship. Just as Ji-hyun was struggling frantically, Baek-san's voice suddenly came through the walkie-talkie. He encouraged Ji-hyun to move forward bravely, saying he could see her from the control room. 3 minutes later, all the special police officers evacuated Ji-hyun safely. When Ji-hyun woke up again, she was already at home. She immediately turned on the news. Lee-Sha had met with UN representatives and signed a ceasefire agreement. The war crisis was completely resolved. The next day, Ji-hyun gave an interview to the media. Man Ji-ai, the current chairman of the new Republican Party, changed his stance again. He took the lead in accusing Ji-hyun of tarnishing the party's reputation, and claimed he would expel Ji-hyun from the party. But Ji-hyun didn't want to pay attention to these annoying buzzing flies. In front of the camera flashes, she openly admitted her relationship with Baek-san, and emphasized that Baek-san was also a hero who stopped the war. Later, Ji-hyun met with Chai-shin. Chai-shin regretfully said that Baek-san's body hadn't been found near the cargo ship, but she wouldn't stop searching. Then Chai-shin seriously told Ji-hyun the US side asked Ji-hyun to help mediate between Lee-Sha and North Korea. Regarding the negotiations over that submarine, Ji-hyun didn't refuse, and took up the role the same day. 2 days later, she went to the US, and met with Tae-woo, who had been acquitted. Tae-woo said happily, the US president would posthumously award Baek-san a Medal of Honor, to recognize his contributions. Finally, they encouraged each other, and vowed to strive for world peace for life. After going back to South Korea, Ji-hyun received another piece of good news. Eun-soo had woken up and was recovering quickly. Eun-soo excitedly said that in the current presidential candidate polls, Ji-hyun's approval rating was still far ahead, but Ji-hyun seemed to have given up on running for president. The next early morning, Ji-hyun went for her usual morning run. Suddenly, Chai-shin called, saying she wanted to nominate Ji-hyun to run for president again. Ji-hyun was silent for a long time before telling Chai-shin she no longer wanted to face those cruel things. But Chai-shin said, what this country needed was someone like Ji-hyun, someone who had gone through hardships, but could stand up again in pain. In the end, Ji-hyun was persuaded. Later, she went to the church to pray for Baek-san. Ji-hyun firmly believed that Baek-san was still alive. A few days later, Ji-hyun put on a neat black suit, and stepped onto the podium again under the gaze of countless people.
저는 오늘 22대 대한민국 대통령 선거 출마를 선언하기 위해 이 자리에 섰습니다.
This is the end of the drama, Tempest, which cost 70 billion won, should have been a benchmark for political intrigue dramas, but it fell into chaos in its grand narrative and value expression. The drama reveals the sorrow of South Korea becoming a pawn of hegemony. This self-deprecation shows a critical edge, but the depth of the political plot was soon overshadowed by the unrealistic Deus Ex Machina plotlines. The sudden change of stance of the Chaebol mother-in-law and the inexplicable defection of various forces, turned the political intrigue into a farce, and made the drama's critical stance seem hypocritical. All in-depth thinking was reduced to a self-deceptive performance. Thank you all for watching. If you like my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.